Let's read The Martian by Andy Weir. Before I get into the review proper, I just have to say that this has got to be one of the best designed book covers I've ever seen. The reason being is that it describes perfectly what this story is about in one clean, simple image. It's about an astronaut on Mars in a perilous situation, and that I think is just wonderful. There's not many book covers that I would say communicate a story so succinctly. There's another cover for this book, and it's the UK cover, and I don't like it because there's a man with a spacesuit, and you can tell he's wearing a spacesuit, but the guy looks like a Calvin Klein model, and it's really, you don't get the same sense of peril. Other book covers will give you pieces of art and elements of that story, but it's harder to discern what the story is about. With fantasy books, it's often, well, it's about a bunch of fantasy people in a fantasy world. But with this thing, you know exactly what the story is. The story is about astronaut Mark Watney, a man who is abandoned on Mars, left for dead when his fellow crew members have to abort the mission when a perilous dust storm threatens to prevent their return. So he's left on Mars, and he has to live by himself for an incredibly long amount of time. He can't be sent supplies, he's unable to receive help, there's no communication with NASA, the time delay is too great, and even if he had a working antenna, well, those are just the start of his problems. There's also things like air, water, and food that he has to worry about, all while working in an environment that could kill him. Watching this man try to survive is interesting. He's a fascinating character. He uses very colorful language. He's often using humor to dissolve the seriousness of the situation that he's in. This is a man who was born and trained to survive on the surface of Mars. So there's no one better suited to attempt to live there. The book uses a lot of modern writing tricks in order to convey its story. It switches between first person, third person, restricted POV, POVs is told by computers, journal entries, blog posts, and cross-cutting Mark Watney's personal struggle with technical processes, or descriptions of technical processes, in order to help increase dramatic tension. And it all works really, really well in terms of creating a nice dramatic and driving pace. There's always something going on in The Martian. Often when Mark encounters a problem, they show his reasoning and his thought, and he educates you when something happens. It's very similar to reading the book Packing for Mars by Mary Roach. These are real things that astronauts have to deal with pretty much every single day that they're in space. One or two things don't quite ring true, which is kind of strange because this book aims for scientific accuracy. There are a few times where Mark Watney is just way too analytical or has the perfect solution. He'll encounter a problem, he'll describe the solution to that problem, and he'll affect the solution to that problem. And there are some times when mathematical diatribes and scientific explanation totally derail the narrative emotion of the story. I don't need a science lesson anytime you introduce something new. If you want to have a character make a bomb, have them make a bomb. You don't need to tell me the intricate, detailed process by which they go and make that bomb. I can trust that these characters are capable. If you've built up other parts of the character's technical knowledge, I will trust that they can build a bomb. He doesn't build a bomb, that's just an example. There's very, very few psychological effects that really get to this character, and I would have loved to have seen a little bit more of him breaking down, just to give us a bit of peril and concern for him in this story. You want to see a character suffer and die a little bit more. I mean, you don't want to see a character suffer and die, but I want to see the character suffer and die. The big problem I had with this book is that there's one character named Annie, and she is the PR relations manager for this NASA mission that Mark Watney is on. And she feels inserted to play the audience surrogate, but she is a dumb audience surrogate. With how much education the book actually gives you, I find it really hard accepting this character. For her job, which is to be informed about space travel and relay that to the media and the press, she's incredibly misinformed and has no knowledge about space travel, and you just know that they wouldn't do that. They would get somebody who knows these things. It wasn't needed at all. You could have left her character out. This book is smarter than that. This book spends all of its time being way smarter than that to treat its audience with that little respect, to treat them like they're that dumb. But overall, the emotional threads in this story make it easy enough to forego those problems and just say, what the hell? There's a section I kind of want to talk about, which I'm going to call the spoilery bits. So let's do the spoilery bits. So in the spoilery bits, of course, Mark Watney lives. It never felt like he was going to die. There's also a long stretch at the end of the book where he ends up traveling in a little rover a few thousand miles across the surface of Mars, and that feels like it would have been the big conclusion to the book, the big struggle for survival for him, because he's going away from his food, his oxygen, his air, and he's taking only what he can carry with him in these rovers. I wanted Mark Watney to be like on the verge of death, dragging himself to this lander so that he could be saved. And he never was. He goes on it, and it's pretty uneventful. And for the dramatic purposes of this story, for the tension of will he or won't he live or make it off this planet, I wish that part would have been way more treacherous, or just had more problems. Like, his equipment is running out, it's breaking down, it's at the end of its shelf life, he can't sustain himself for very much longer, he needs to make it there. But instead, it's a pretty uneventful journey. He travels the few thousand miles in a really short amount of time in the book. There's this large gap that it's almost like they didn't need to tell you anything because it was so uneventful. So this story plays out a lot like Apollo 13 meets The Hatchet. That is also a good book. But strangely, when you have things from this book that actually feel borrowed from Apollo 13, it's the exact same narrative arc, the exact same type of story, that The Martian loses some of its novelty as a result. The book also calls out the fact that NASA astronauts may need to be in space for these long journeys for thousands of days at a time. There's a funny chapter that cross-cuts this with NASA flight controllers who can't even be on a plane for an 18-hour flight. So that's all I really have to say about the spoilery bits. Let's go back to the regular bits. I think this would make an excellent TV series. It'd be wonderful to have like an HBO-style show where you watch Mark Watney survive by himself over the course of a season, because just the struggle is that long, and there's so many adventures and build-ups and episodes or episodic divisions in this narrative that you could have to really, really draw out an amazing story of survival. So The Martian is a really, really good book. I loved it a lot. It's got a very driving pace. There's not a dull moment in it. Obviously, I had more to say about what I didn't like about the book than what I did love the book, but it's just a really, really well-written book. I don't think you have to be a science fiction fan to get into this one. Anybody could pick this up and read it. It's a really fun book. The character of Mark Watney is interesting. He's got a lot of personality. He exudes it in all of his emails and blog posts or his writing as he's documenting his survival on Mars. And it's got one of the most gorgeous covers I've ever seen, and I love this cover so much. I just wish I could stop fetishizing this cover because of how good it looks. It looks so yummy. But that leaves me with a big question. Are there covers that you feel communicate the meaning, tone, personality, and substance of a story in just a quick glance, in a single image like this? What other covers do that? I would really, really like to know. That's my review of The Martian. As usual, I hope you have a wonderful reading week. We will talk to you later. Bye-bye.